We welcome back the host of the series, Chairman and co-founder of Executive Conversation, Jim Melillo. Jim's career includes broad CFO experience with both public and private companies within corporate development and treasury, mergers and acquisitions, as well as financing. Let me quickly share a few logistical steps and we'll get started. This presentation will run 30 minutes, at the end of which we'll address as many of your questions as we have time. Please enter your questions in the question box on the right side of your screen during the presentation. Also during this presentation, we'll be posting live polling questions and welcome and encourage your participation in those. Jim, without further delay, let me turn the program over to you.
Eric, thank you, and thanks everybody for coming back. Over 500 registrations for this first one of the series. Thanks so very much. Do your company a favor if you could. Spread the word. It only helps. Second thing is that we've got several people that have had the code for being on the discussion. And as a result of that, if you hear yourself coming through, just your mute button, and that'll solve it. It's been a year of change, and we have changed also. We have brought on some of the most senior CXOs, technology, media, manufacturing. Come on the website, take a look at the new people that are available to work with you. Get this idea. Well, it's interesting. We've begun working with a client who has an average large deal size in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And working with the CXOs in our organization and working with their senior executives, we began to talk about what is it that pulls together a $100, $200 million deal. And the answer is always service. And so as buyers, we have been seeing services coming forward more and more. So we thought we would put together a fairly fast pace, and there's a lot of ideas here around services, its role for you, how we see it as buyers, and where we're going. As always, we start off with a poll, and today's poll actually doesn't have a right or wrong answer, but it does have an insight. So if you would, with voting, you get a chance to have an insight. I believe that selling product and add-on services tends to, A, slow down my sales cycle, B, improve customer satisfaction, C, deliver more predictable outcomes, D, increase my income potential. If you would, as you know, there's only 30 seconds to vote. We've only got 20 more left. You've got 10 seconds to vote. Is it going to slow down my sales cycle, improve customer sat, deliver an outcome, or increase my income potential? How do you see, personally, product and add-on services? So, Eric, if you could, what are the numbers we have now that the poll is closed?
Interesting results, Jim, with two options clearly emerging as the most popular. The first being option number 2 at 48%, improving customer satisfaction, followed at 33% by the bottom choice, increase my income potential. The last two at 5%, the very first option, slowing down my sales cycle, an interesting number there. And lastly, at 14%, deliver more predictable outcomes.
Fantastic. I'm so happy that everybody on this poll recognizes that by choosing D and D, that you are effectively recognizing the value of add-on services to me, the buyer. The A, I think you're being a little bit positive, maybe a little overly positive, is that it will slow down your sales cycle somewhat. But the answer that way overcompensates for that slowdown is it will increase your deal size dramatically. You know, corporations are not hiring. In the United States, we've seen a lot of statistics since we've seen the bottom. The bottom, by the way, hit between January and April, depending on the statistic, back in 2009. And since then, every statistic has rebounded except for one. So let's take a look at them. If you're a shareholder, your 401k is up over 100%. The corporate profits are up 112%. The GDP is up 7%. How is it possible for profits to grow 100% and GDP only 7%? The answer is employment. The total number of people employed in the U.S. since that first quarter of 2009 is up between 1% and 2%, depending on the statistics, so we chose 1.5. And why is that? Most of us have embraced outsourcing, co-sourcing, services part-time versus hiring. In addition, we've begun to do more complex multinational arrangements whereby we are having certain things pre-assembled or pre-made and reassembled here, such that the overall direction for organizations for the last 4 to 5 years has been and will continue to be to embrace services from their vendors, from their partners, to drive revenue and profit growth, and to limit hiring. This is the opportunity that's available for you. This is the statistic that you're selling to. This is my direction that I'm buying to. So we see bundles everywhere. And for those of you that are not currently using them in manufacturing and hospital media, here are 3 examples from the problem we have with American obesity to being able to handle everything all at once. But bundling, it gives me as a buyer an opportunity to do a lot of different things. But to do that, you've got to overcome some hurdles. The advantages to you, I recognize, are great. First of all, you're going to sell me larger deals. Second of all, that commit to a whose quality may be difficult to assess, but I'm willing to do that with my trusted partners. You need, though, to figure out how to convince me, how to work with me, how to find the correct people, how to have the correct executive discussion so that you can overcome some of the issues that are there. And in many cases, I may work very hard to break through the transparency. We're going to talk a little bit about that because that's not a particularly easy thing for you to overcome. So what you have is a great opportunity, as we can see up here. There are tremendous benefits to you, but it's a long road. And so the essential point that starts off with is when you begin selling services with your product, it requires a different mentality by you, and more importantly, you've got to help me with my mentality, with my orientation. We're not going to bring in concepts of risk. We're not going to bring in concepts of shared services. We're going to shared risk. We're going to talk about risk reduction. We're going to talk about the ability to move from a best-in-class to a more centralized single vendor who has best-in-class, good-in-class, and okay-in-class. And you've got to help me make that. So what's a good example of a service that everybody knows about? I think we chose cloud computing. Cloud computing has been around for 5 or 6 years already, and you can take a look at it is by no means, quote, being embraced by everybody. And so if you believe these numbers, at best it will take 6 to 10 years before cloud computing from its beginning to what we'll call a comfortable sell-in is something that people want to do. And the other problem is what you can begin to see here is you don't see anything that resembles the word core here. You see infrastructure. You see platforms. You see software. You don't see core business processes here. You don't see core direction. So even after a decade, this service will not have gotten to getting people to move their core business into the cloud. I can say the same thing will happen for the services that are going to go along with your hospital equipment, along with your manufacturing platform, along with your ability to talk to me about what is the value add of utilizing your resources, your intellectual property, your services group, versus my doing it internally. What is the value add of doing that? More importantly, how do you change the conversation? So here's what you're going to be facing if you're not already facing. You see this growing revenue trend that your senior executives are looking for by the service add-on. And yet, we have seen most people have at best a good and bad acknowledgement, learning, direction around how to sell that services revenue. That is the crux of this whole problem, is that traditionally when you were selling products, you had product training. When you first get to sales, you had products and you were being told how to sell those products. And so I, as a buyer, heard those pitches, saw those flip charts, saw those PowerPoint presentations. And most of you have begun to transition, if you've been working with us, to having more business-oriented conversations, such that I, as a buyer, can relate more to what's going on. Now we have this second transition called product plus service, or leading with service, and the product becomes the generic. There's a new education, there's a new learning that needs to go on around this, and we recognize that it has not been as smooth as the revenue expectations for quota. And so what are those changes that are going on? Well, here we put down seller's perspective and buyer's perspective, and you can read the chart as you can always. One of the things what I want to focus on is the buyer's perspective, what's going on with me. And so as you can begin to see, as you begin bringing me more services, as you begin selling that service within my organization, you're touching a greater portion of my organization. And you're opening me up to greater risk because it's a multi-year, most likely it's a multi-year relationship. It's most likely a growing relationship because traditionally with a service business deal that I work on, I'm usually looking to start with something and add to it. Unlike a product where I may buy a series of where I might buy a series of servers or a series of inhalation therapy devices or hospital beds or Caterpillar tractors, this is actually something where I begin to start with one portion of my business and expect that if it's successful, it will grow. So it's not only multi-year, it also gets broader. And you need to become part of my broader conversation with my organization. You also have to address the risk because I am taking on more risk by working with an individual company. What we have seen in the past has been that people diversified risk by working with multiple companies. I think a lot of us buyers have begun to realize that going with a single basket is important to do that. But again, there's a great saying that Buffett gave, which is it's okay to put all your eggs in one basket. You just better watch the basket awful closely. So see that risk in that basket, you need to help us understand how we can de-risk that. And so what I'm looking for you? I'm looking for you to move from transaction to adoption. We are no longer buying an equipment. We are adopting a method, process, a business process. You need to move from a one-time transaction to buy your product to I need to be relationship ongoing with that. For those of people that are used to working with me and then moving on to another one, your company as well as you and your group are going to have to figure out how to maintain a level of relationship with that so that we have the renewal of the contract. You can't just send it down to the lowest sales cost in order to send them their technology upgrade once every 2 years. And the other one is you may need to absorb some risk. Your products, I absorbed all the risk. I bought a piece of hardware, a piece of software, I bought a manufacturing numerical controlled machine, and I put it in my shop, and I was responsible for making that make money. Now, because it's ongoing, I'm going to be asking you to absorb some risk on that. You need to be able to articulate that quite well. So as we begin to move on, we begin to find that selling these add-on services is going to require this broader approach by you. It's going to require you to sell both internally and externally. Let me talk about this point for a second. for many people, the service discussion can be as complex internally within your own organization as it is with my company. Because a lot of times the service add-on allows me as a buyer to start picking up more products from you across platform. Things that you may not have as an assignment. So you may be in charge of selling product A, but the service component allows me to utilize both A and B together, and you may not get commissions for B, or you may not be as well versed with B. So it requires you to take a broader approach to your business as a salesperson internally, because as a buyer externally, I'm the one that's going to be looking for you to be the on-ramp to that more successful relationship, and for me, the more successful implementation. And what keeps me from doing that is your inability to explain the value of this complex mixture of product A plus product B plus service. So again, if you're going to be selling services, you need to not only have the internal and external broad corporate approach comfortable and down pat, as well as you need to be able to explain to me about the add-on services and how those are going to bring value. And so that will leave you, as you take a look at these ideas we've just provided you, at your accounts. And you have 4 types of accounts. 1, you've never worked with the company. 2, you currently are selling them products. 3, products and some low-value services. And 4 is the buyers of both products and services that are already going to different departments. And so as we take a look at these, let's take a look at the strategies that are ongoing. The first strategy is you have a buyer of neither products or services. And so what is your strategy there? And it's pretty clear. That's what we have been talking about for these last 2 years. You need to build the executive conversation. You need to figure out how you can link to the department, line of business, SBU. And 3, you need to find the compensation metrics that put things together. These are the things that allow you to have this conversation with me. Let's say you're currently selling the person product and you want to upgrade the services. If you remember that chart, your manager, your VP of sales has said, this is our new revenue line, and the way we go from here to here is by selling services. Very simple. It's going to require education of yourself and then education of me. You're going to have to show me what the service metrics are. So the service metrics are those things that allow me to change my business through your service. Third of all, you have to realize that it is going to be transitional, and so that we are not going to switch out $20 million worth of product for $5 million of services a year for the next 5 to 10 years. And the last one, and please take a look at this, what is the way that my buying services from you reduces my risk of business? Does it reduce my risk of labor rate? Does it reduce my exchange rate? Does it reduce my in-hospital debts? Does it reduce my billing errors? What is the value of service relative to risk? It's one of the greatest value discussions you can have when taking someone you have a product discussion with to a service discussion. Then we currently sell products and we have some low-value services. We have some maintenance. We have a 12% add-on. We have a low-value services. We're really not providing services to change their business. And we put that up. Great. So you need to now, because I understand services already, you now need to link that services to specific value. The second thing is you need to have internal references that can help me understand how taking it from a low value to a high value or moving it from one area to another is powerful. And the third thing you need is a service ROI. If you notice, we haven't talked about ROI so far. This is where this comes into play. If I'm going to move up, I need a service ROI relative to that. And the fourth one is, and this is sort of a good place to be, you have buyers of one subsidiary that are buying products and another subsidiary that's buying services. And so what you need to begin doing is thinking about bundled value. Although you may not want to, because this also covers bundled costing, this is the way I'm going to think. In addition, you have to sell at the executive level. The biggest problem you have is that the departments that I have within my organization, whether it's or within, try to unbundle and look through. You've got to get executive selling that value. And then the corporate link to the corporate metrics. This is the value of services, the corporate metrics, the corporate link. So what comes out of this discussion is you need to target your buyers specifically. You need to target that value. You need to recognize how the process becomes complex, and it reduces risk, and it goes to a more senior level. Those are the things that you need to do as you transition from any one of those positions that you just were in to a more complex one. And so a good example of this on a chart is we have the two different decision makers in a traditional relationship. This becomes the person who is most enabled to create this linkage. They're not only going to create the linkage here, but we also might have budget that needs to be shared here. And you're going to have that traditional pull. Or these could be different lines, and thus you've got possibly different demands. All you need to do is read any story about when a defense contractor is trying to sell a jet to the military, and in one group you have the Marines, and the other one you have the Army, and the third one you have the Air Force, and how every one of them wants to make the plane do or be something, and yet ultimately that customer, executive, the head of the Defense Department, needs to be the one who steps in and creates that relationship that allows them to make the sale of the jet and allows you to make the sale of both the product and the service across multiple departments. As we finish up, we begin to start taking a look at some of the metrics. And as you know, we talk a lot about metrics. And so what are the metrics around your target decision maker? They're all going to be around business performance. And you can have, as we just talked about, different demands from different buyer groups within the organization. The business performance will include the value to the corporation. It will include the risk reduction. It will include the value across the corporation. That value across the corporation is the reason why I talk to you about $10 million deals when you're only selling me $2. It's why I talk to you about $200 million deals when normally I'd have a $25 to $50 million relationship with you. It's because value increase to the total corporation. There's a risk reduction to the total corporation. There's a linkage to the total corporation metrics and the total corporation business performance. Do not get stuck down here because you will get picked apart the same way the Army, the Air Force, and the Marines are trying to pick apart the airplane. So someone once said that an elephant is a horse designed by a committee. Well, that's where you can get caught up in. So all of a sudden, your beautiful thoroughbred that you're looking to put together and sell to me, now because I have my fighting lines of business and SBUs, all of a sudden morphs into an elephant. Figure out how to sell me a horse. Figure out how to find the organizational structure that will support buying a horse and will do some of this work for you. But bring the value, bring the risk reduction, and bring the corporate impact. And so as you manage these multiple decision makers I just spoke about, you need to find that one person we just talked about, that leader who can bring this together, bring coherence to this discussion. And you need to work also with the underlying decision makers within the lines of business, within the different departments of the Defense Department. You need to bring them together so that they understand how it affects them. If you don't have all three legs of the stool, the executive is not going to be willing to sit on top of it. So get everybody to understand the value, then get the executive to drive the individual initiatives, and you drive the corporate change. And finally, the business outcomes. They have to recognize within the division, but more importantly, they have to talk to the corporate, because the corporate is ultimately the one that's going out on the line here. It's going to be the CFO, the Chief Operating Officer, the VP of R&D. It's going to be the Chief Medical Officer. It's going to be the Chief Marketing Officer, one of the biggest buyers in the coming decade of a lot of services, the new see something who has got power within the organization. All of them are looking for this across-the-board business outcome. As we move towards the end of this and start taking your questions, please look at our blogs, take a look at the LinkedIn relationship if you want to find out where we're going. You know, one of the last truths is you need to understand why customers buy the add-on. You need to understand mine. Until you sell me the add-on services, you need to understand mine. You need to appreciate those areas that we've already discussed today. You need to align with that business outcome. You need to focus on that product plus service and how that drives my direction, how it drives my business. You need to sell that outcome to my corporation. You need to sell that outcome at the higher level. You need to sell the outcome of services. And when you do that, you have the opportunity to change our relationship, we change who you work with, and dramatically increase the effect you have on my company, the solution and changes you can affect to my initiative, and the ability to grow our relationship from vendor to partner. Eric, any questions? I know we covered a lot in a very short period of time, but as usual, we're running out of time.
Jim, fantastic presentation. Thank you. We do have a host that I will cherry pick from. The first being, how do I protect and grow a product and service relationship with an account that's been in existence for a long time?
That's the one I talked about, where most of the time he's what I see as a buyer. So, great conversation, and I decide that you can, on a multi-year contract, reduce my risk and change my business. What you then traditionally do is you move it down to your telesales group, or you move it down to a lower group. I'm going to suggest to you that those account reviews with the senior people and that ability to maintain that relationship has to come from one of the initial people that created the deal. So if you're in a company whereby you come with the partner in charge, but then you give it off to the, let's call it the B+ player, make sure the B+ player is a lead at the beginning. So when I start working with the B+ player, he not only or she not only understands my business, but also can talk intelligently to it, and I feel serviced. My biggest problem is when the A and the B+ player comes to the original sale and rollout, and then I end up with the C's. I find that way too many times.
Great. You opened the session talking about a client you were working with on a large deal. What were some of the challenges they faced or that you got involved with there?
Sure. This client is a specialty group that sells in the $100 to $300 million size deals. And traditionally, I would suggest that without the service component, the deal size might be in the 50 to 75 million. The biggest problem they have, and the three biggest problems are, one, they don't get senior enough buy-in, and so as a result of that senior enough buy-in, they end up getting the deals cherry-picked. Cherry-picked meaning that they end up in purchasing anyway. The second problem is that the service organization doesn't show me in a coherent method why working with an HR product and a financial product, or working with an ICU and working within a general healthcare population product, how one large service and product agreement helps change my business. So what happens is they end up focusing too much on the individual components, they don't have that corporate direction, that corporate delivery, that corporate change, and thus we don't see them as a single opportunity. We see them as a throw together, a bundle of fries with pancakes, and thus we don't have a problem picking them apart because we don't see any value at the corporate level.
You talked a lot about sharing risk or reducing risk from a buyer's perspective. What are some ways as a seller I can help do so?
I think there's a couple of ways. First of all, you need to recognize, and you need to get your corporation to recognize that there needs to be some shared risk if you want to engage in a multi-year agreement. And all one needs to do is look at traditional outsourcing and co-sourcing agreements where there are tremendous numbers of triggers or, if you will call them, a fault, where if you don't do something, there's a penalty or there's actually a termination. So first of all, you need to truly recognize within your corporation, then personally, what that risk is. The second one then is you need to be able to clearly show me what the risk reduction is for me as an organization. What is the value of me standardizing on you? What is the value of me having your people come in and take over certain capabilities that I've normally held in-house? What is the risk reduction that occurs when I look to you to both become a partner in running my manufacturing facility, my hospital, and I have to trust, just like I trusted my anesthesiologist, my manufacturing foreman, and my technology people to do something, I need to see how that risk reduction is in place and how the business processes within my organization remain as good, if not better, once we've worked together.
Let's take one more and we'll wrap it up. Who would you suggest as a good target executive to initiate a value-add service conversation?
So the target executive is always going to be the core product, core service person. So a good example, if you're putting in an enterprise resource planning, ERP system, with other products that are added onto it, whether you like it or not, the COO is going to be the main driver. I'll make it even simpler. Take a look at the project. It spans multiple departments or multiple lines of business, but you can be sure one department, one line of business, one SBU is going to be putting up 50% of the budget or 60%, and the others are all going to be 10 or 20. Take a look at who's going to be putting in the largest portion of their budget into the project. That becomes the core. And take a look at the second largest, and then that becomes the influencer. And those become the two people who you want to affect. Then take a look at who they both report to, and that's the third person you want to have in the conversation.
Jim, again, thank you for a very informative, fast-paced session. This concludes today's webinar.
Thanks, everybody. Look forward to seeing you next month.